25-year-old Noémie and 20-year-old Audrey Belanger are two student sisters from Pohenegamook, Quebec, Canada, who successfully completed their academic year and decided to treat themselves to a trip around Southeast Asia. The girls had just begun their long vacation and could spend an entire month traveling. Their older sister Helene gladly supported their idea of seeing the world. However, their parents, Linda and Carl Belanger, were not so enthusiastic. Like any parents, they worried and doubted whether they should let their beloved, precious daughters go on such a journey. After all, anything could happen to them. They could fall ill, become victims of wild animals or natural disasters, be robbed or even killed. But when they voiced their concerns, Noémie promised that everything would be fine, that they would behave carefully and sensibly, stay away from dangerous trails, and that she would personally make sure that nothing happened to her or Audrey. Audrey, in turn, played the role of the obedient younger sister and promised to listen to Noémie in everything. Linda and Carl were not fooled by their daughter's cunning, but they let the sisters go on the trip anyway. The tour of Southeast Asia promised to be the trip of a lifetime, and it began wonderfully. The girls traveled to Vietnam, where they spent 3 amazing weeks. They walked a lot, explored the sights, and made new acquaintances. In particular, they met Jeff and Luciano, two 25-year-old young men from Brazil. They had a great time together and did not want to part ways. But life is unpredictable, and it turned out they didn't have to say goodbye. Just like the girls, Jeff and Luciano were planning to continue their journey through Southeast Asia with a trip to Thailand. Thailand was meant to be the grand finale before returning home. Moreover, they were planning to visit the same Phi Phi Islands. However, this was not so surprising, since it is a very popular archipelago known for its stunning limestone cliffs, turquoise waters, white sandy beaches, and rich marine life. The guys headed to Phi Phi a little earlier and promised to find a decent hotel where all 4 of them could stay. Soon Jeff wrote to the girls, saying they had found what they considered to be a pretty good hotel, with spacious rooms for £24. He wrote that the room has air conditioning, free Wi-Fi. It's 5 minutes from the beach and 5 minutes from the clubs. Noémie and Audrey trusted the taste of their new acquaintances and booked a room at the same hotel as Jeff and Luciano. On June 12, 2012, Noémie and Audrey entered the hotel room that was supposed to be their refuge for the next few days, after which they would return to their ordinary lives in Quebec. The room looked clean and tidy. It also had air conditioning, providing pleasant coolness, just what they needed after a long journey. As soon as Audrey stepped in, she ran to the bathroom to take a shower and get ready for the evening. The girls had arranged to meet Jeff and Luciano on the beach that night. Noémie wondered where her sister found so much energy. After the flight, the ferry, and the ride in a local taxi known as a tuk-tuk, she herself was exhausted. All she wanted was to fall onto the bed, let her legs rest a little, and enjoy the working air conditioner. But the girl remembered in time the promise she had made to her parents less than a month earlier, to be careful. She knew that in some Southeast Asian hotels, room cleanliness was sometimes treated rather carelessly. So Noémie lifted the blankets and pillows and carefully examined the bed linen. She wanted to make sure she wouldn't find any dirt, hair, or signs of bed bugs. To her complete satisfaction, the sheets were perfectly clean. There wasn't a single stain on them. With a relieved sigh, Noémie lay down and allowed herself to relax for a while. A little later, she got up from the bed and joined her sister in the bathroom, where she also began getting ready for their evening walk. Then Noémie and Audrey left the room, locked the door, and headed to the beach. It was only a 5-minute walk from the hotel. The guys were already waiting for them near a beach bar. From a distance, the girls noticed that Jeff and Luciano were holding large, bright, colorful buckets in their hands. At first, they thought the guys were joking, but as they came closer and looked more carefully, they saw that the buckets were filled to the brim with ice and some kind of liquid. It was obviously a drink. Noémie and Audrey greeted their friends and asked what kind of drink it was. It's worth noting that nowadays a cocktail served in a bucket hardly surprises anyone. Many people have tried this usually alcoholic drink, mixed from various juices, syrups, fruits, candies, and several types of alcohol. It is served in a child's sand bucket or something similar and drunk through straws. But Noémie and Audrey were clearly encountering this kind of presentation for the first time. The young men replied that it was an amazing cocktail available exclusively in this part of the world. It was called 4 for 100, and it was very tasty. The girls asked what it was made of and what made it so special. The guys exchanged glances, laughed, and said they didn't know, but it had a sweet, fruity taste and was definitely worth trying. Audrey did just that, while Noémie, as usual, showed caution. Their new acquaintances were very pleasant young men and had never done anything to upset or frighten the girls. But Noémie couldn't forget the promise she had made to her parents. She had to stay alert. Their relationship with the Brazilians had developed very quickly. Maybe they should have parted ways in Vietnam, but instead, they had all come to Thailand together, and who knew what might happen next? Noémie believed Audrey was easier to deceive because she was more open and trusting. After all, she was 5 years younger. However, looking around, Noémie noticed that other vacationers on the beach were holding exactly the same buckets. People were casually sipping the drink through straws. The girl decided that if it was so popular, it must really be a good cocktail. She reached out, took one of the buckets, and had a sip. The guys hadn't lied about this either. The drink was very tasty, invigorating, and refreshing. The sun had long since set, but the beach was still alive and buzzing with energy. Audrey and Noémie were enjoying the last days of their trip. A DJ was playing at the bar, and the girls danced near him. The great thing about a beach party is that at any moment you can jump into the Andaman Sea to cool off, which they did. They also tried many local dishes, washing down the spiciness with drinks. By now, they had lost count of how many 4 for 100 cocktails they had drunk, and honestly, it would have been nearly impossible to keep track. The girls also met 2 more tourists, and all of them shared drinks from the same bucket. When the night grew deep, Noémie felt her vision blur from the amount she had consumed. On top of that, she was thoroughly exhausted. Just in time, Jeff suggested that she return to the hotel. The girl agreed, but first she went over to her sister, who was dancing a little farther away, and asked if she was tired. Unlike her sister, Audrey was full of energy and didn't want to go back to the room. She even suggested that Noémie stay on the beach a little longer. However, Noémie was nodding off. So she headed to the hotel with the young man, while Audrey and Luciano stayed on the beach. Until now, the sisters had never been apart, especially when drinking at a party or a bar. For obvious reasons, that could have ended badly for one of them. But for some reason that evening they were both confident that everything would be fine. Noémie decided she could leave her sister with her new friends. Besides, they were in a crowded area just a 5-minute walk from the hotel, so Noémie returned to the room, while Audrey stayed on the beach. 3 days later, in the evening of June 15th, the maid of the hotel where the young people were staying approached Audrey and Noémie's room and knocked once again. But just as on the previous 2 days, she received no answer. Over the past couple of days, the hotel staff had not seen anyone entering or leaving the room. Overall, there was absolutely nothing unusual about this. Tourists in Thailand often rent a room, leave their belongings there, and then go on a long hike in the mountains or to local attractions. Nevertheless, it was time for the maid to enter the room and clean it, preparing it for the next guests. After knocking once more, just in case, she used her key to open the door. She loudly announced that she was the maid and needed to tidy up the room, but again, nobody answered. Satisfied that no one was in the room, and that she would not disturb anyone, the woman turned the doorknob and stepped inside. But literally moments later, she shot out of the room like a bullet. Her screams drew other staff members, who rushed over and called the police. At 9 o'clock in the evening, police officers led by Lieutenant Colonel Rat Somboon entered the hotel and went into Noémie and Audrey Bélanger's room. When they saw everything with their own eyes, they understood why the maid had run out in terror. The room was unbearable. The air was thick with a heavy, foul, suffocating stench. Noémie and Audrey were lying on their respective beds, covered with blankets, in positions that might have suggested they were simply asleep, if it weren't for the fact that their heads were surrounded by their own vomit. The police estimated that the tourists had been dead for 12 to 20 hours. At first glance, it appeared that alcohol poisoning had claimed their lives. This assumption seemed reasonable, as it explained why they had been vomiting. Moreover, Phi Phi is a popular island among tourists, and as is well known, vacationers often stop at a bar for a drink or two while enjoying themselves. But a closer examination of both the bodies and the hotel room forced the police to reconsider this theory. Rat Sumbun noticed dried blood on the girls' gums and under their fingernails. Such a symptom did not match alcohol poisoning. The lieutenant colonel therefore suggested that this dried blood had gotten there because the victims had struggled with someone. All the more so because he noticed a note at the door of the room that said only, "I am very sorry." Who was apologizing? And for what? Perhaps the girls had fallen victim to a killer tormented by guilt after committing the crime. However, all of Noemi and Audrey's belongings, including money, remained in place. They had not been violated. There were no signs of forced entry into the room or indications of a struggle for life. If the victims had fought so fiercely as to scrape the attacker's skin with their fingernails, it would have been obvious from the state of the room. Furniture would have been overturned or broken. The police were completely baffled. They decided that the situation could only be clarified by the results of an autopsy and a toxicology report. This was the only way to determine exactly what had happened to the tourists. But of course they understood that the reports would take time. Not wanting to lose time, Rat Sumbun decided that his officers should first find out how the girls had spent their last hours. Which places did they visit? What did they eat? What did they drink? And with whom? The police spent several days questioning the hotel staff and learned that the victims were Canadian. They had arrived from Vietnam and went out for a walk upon their arrival. The staff noticed that the girls returned separately, each accompanied by 2 other hotel guests. Noemi returned with Jeff around 1 a.m., while Audrey and Luciano didn't appear until 4 a.m. The young men left the hotel at 6 a.m. After that, no one saw the girls again. Rat Sumbun requested the hotel's CCTV footage. The video confirmed all the staff's statements. It turned out that the 2 Brazilian men had been the last people to see the girls alive. However, they have already left Thailand and headed to Hong Kong. Both Brazil and Hong Kong were, of course, outside the jurisdiction of the Thai police. So Rat Sumbun contacted Interpol and asked his colleagues at the International Law Enforcement Organization to locate the Brazilians and speak with them. Interpol officers contacted the lieutenant colonel a week later. They had located Jeff and Luciano. When they informed the men that Noemi and Audrey were dead, the 2 were genuinely horrified. When asked why they had left Thailand in such a hurry, they assured the police that they had booked their plane tickets long before their departure, and when the flight date came, they simply boarded the plane. There was nothing suspicious about that. They had no idea what had happened to the girls, and had tried several times to get in touch with them. They had called, sent messages, knocked on the hotel room door, and tried to let the girls know it was time to leave and that they wanted to say goodbye before their departure. But the girls did not respond, and the men assumed they might have upset them somehow. On June 13th, Jeff slipped the very note with an apology, later found by the police, under the girls' door. Of course, the Interpol officers didn't simply accept the men's explanations. They continued to press the suspects, emphasizing that they had been the last people to see the tourists alive. They asked how Jeff and Luciano had felt when they parted from the girls. Jeff and Luciano reported that the girls had clearly drunk a lot. Fatigue from the journey was also evident. It was clear that Noemi and Audrey could have lain down to rest, but aside from that, they seemed perfectly fine. Here's the curious part. Jeff and Luciano said that after relaxing by the bar on the beach on the night of June 12th to 13th, they themselves began feeling very unwell. They spent 2 days in bed and were extremely nauseated. The young men never understood why, but once they started feeling better, they simply put it out of their minds. Lieutenant Colonel Rat Sumbun thanked the Interpol officers for their work and hung up the phone. To be honest, the lieutenant colonel wasn't entirely convinced that the Brazilians were completely innocent. On the other hand, if they were telling the truth and had also fallen ill, it was possible that all 4 had been exposed to the same poison or virus. But the men's bodies had managed to cope with it, while the girls' bodies had not. What could have affected 4 healthy young people at the same time? Rat Sumbun placed his bet on food poisoning. Tourists visiting Thailand naturally try many local foods, and sometimes it makes them very sick. While spicy food usually causes only allergies or mild digestive upset, overindulgence in certain mushrooms, especially magic mushrooms, or in pufferfish, fugu, can be fatal. Regarding fugu, The most expensive dish the students could afford was a $5 serving, so there was no question of them purchasing the $300 version. The lieutenant colonel was just about to check whether the beach bar had served any mushroom dishes when the toxicology report and the pathologist's findings arrived. It turned out that his initial theory of food poisoning had been completely wrong, because both girls' bodies tested positive for diethyltoluamide, or DEET, the active ingredient in many pesticides and insect repellents. But how did it get there? The girls had actually consumed it willingly. The catch was, they didn't know it. Remember those drinks in the bright, colorful buckets that so many tourists were sipping on the beach? The ones the guys described as a unique Thai cocktail. Here's the truth. It really is unique to Thailand, but not because the recipe is a closely guarded secret passed down through generations. It's unique because it isn't harmless, unlike many other modern popular bucket drinks. The Thai cocktail contains no alcohol. Some Thai locals are Muslim, and their religion forbids alcohol, so bartenders began adding kratom leaves as an energizing component. Kratom acts as a stimulant, giving a powerful surge of energy. On top of that, the cocktail contained crushed illicit substances, cough syrup, Coca-Cola for sweetness and flavor, and the pesticide DEET. Since the drink had no alcohol, it became popular among Thai youth and tourists alike. But now it's clear why it is not allowed or popular anywhere else in the world. Diethyltoluamide, or DEET, is the main component of mosquito repellent. It's a highly toxic substance, and thanks to the 4 for 100 cocktail, it ended up in the bodies of both girls. So there's no doubt, it's a dangerous drink. However, local residents and tourists regularly consume this beach cocktail, and people don't drop dead from it left and right. Therefore, Rat Sambun concluded that the bartender, or another bar employee who prepared the drinks that specific time, accidentally used too much DEET. This explained why the Brazilians also felt sick, but their bodies were able to withstand the toxin, leaving them with nothing more than a case of poisoning. 9 days after the girls' deaths, their bodies were sent to Canada along with the official statement from the Thai police, claiming that the girls had died as the result of an accident. DEET poisoning. This empty explanation became the last straw, completely overwhelming the parents' patience. They were already furious with the Thai police because when the daughters stopped responding, Linda, Carl, and their sister Hélène had done everything possible to contact them. They couldn't find any peace, only to later learn that the police had already discovered the bodies and begun an investigation. The poor parents first learned of their daughters' deaths through the media, and at first could not believe it was Noémie and Audrey. They were convinced that they would have been notified first. Finally, they received a call from the embassy, which explained that normally such news is not given over the phone, but there was no time to delay. Embassy officials confirmed the deaths of Noémie and Audrey Bélanger. The parents and sister were crushed with grief. If at that moment they could have tried to understand the Thai police's actions, thinking that perhaps the authorities had reasons to delay notifying the family, now they had to face the unbearable truth. Their daughters had died because of a drink that half of Thailand and many tourists regularly consume. The cocktail was still being offered at the beach bar. No one had been punished, and no one was required to inform patrons of the drink's dangerous components. Linda, Carl, and Hélène had to accept that other tourists who drank from the same buckets as the girls had survived simply because they were lucky, and Noémie and Audrey had not. Although the girls had been young, strong, and healthy. From the family's perspective, the Thai police's conclusion looked like a hollow excuse, a way to cover up the incident so it wouldn't affect tourism. The investigation had been carried out carelessly, unworthy of a police department. Naturally, grief-stricken, the parents demanded some form of action and insisted on a more thorough investigation. The Canadian government agreed with them. As a result, Noémie and Audrey's bodies, upon arrival in Canada, were handed not to the family, but to Quebec's chief coroner, René Roussel. Coroner René Roussel examined the autopsy report on the victims' bodies. She found that while DEET was indeed present in Noémie and Audrey's systems, its level was far below not only a lethal dose but even a toxic one. Of course, this does not negate the fact that the drink was unsafe, but it explains why none of the girls' other new acquaintances, aside from the Brazilians who also drank the cocktails on the beach, felt ill. In other words, the girls were not killed by the drinks. Yet Renee found no other poison in their bodies. This meant it must have been some substance that entered their system, caused irreversible harm, but dissipated quickly enough to leave no detectable trace in laboratory tests. To understand what this substance could have been, Renee needed to carefully study the victims' movements on their last day. Fortunately, the Thai police had done a thorough job, and nearly minute-by-minute details of the girl's final day were known. When the coroner read the police report, the first suspicions began to form in her mind. As she dug deeper, Renee discovered that between 2009 and 2012, about 20 tourists had been found dead under very similar circumstances. In particular, in 2009 in the same hotel, 2 young women, a Norwegian and an American, died within 2 days of each other in adjacent rooms. The cause of their deaths was never determined, but their symptoms resembled those of Audrey and Noémie. Renee concluded that all of these people had been victims of poisoning. However, the common factor was not a drink or food. There had to be something else, something that poisoned them, something that damaged blood vessels, which would explain the blood on the gums and under the fingernails. But that dissipated so quickly that the poison could not be detected after death. Her initial suspicions were confirmed when it became known that on June 6, 2012, a week before the sisters arrived, another tourist had complained about the hotel where the girls would die. He wrote that his room was full of bed bugs, that he had been badly bitten, spent the whole night in agony, and had gotten no sleep at all. Bed bugs are a serious problem in hotels in Thailand, as in many other places. So it's not surprising that when the girls arrived in Thailand and entered their room, the first thing Noémie did was check the bed linen. She wanted to make sure the sheets were clean before lying down and relaxing. They appeared clean to her, and how could it have been otherwise? The beds had just been treated for bed bugs. The hotel staff had sprayed phosphine on the beds. Pure phosphine is a highly toxic gas, colorless and odorless. It is extremely lethal to bed bugs and effectively eliminates their population. But it is equally toxic to humans. Of course, this is dangerous. Of course, it is illegal. But in Thailand, people tend to ignore it. Renee Roussel concluded that events unfolded as follows. After returning from the beach, all 4, Noémie, Audrey, Jeff, and Luciano, went to their rooms to rest. All 4 were exposed to phosphine. The gas penetrated their bodies through the skin. They inhaled it without realizing it. They grew progressively weaker. Jeff and Luciano had to get up and leave within 2 hours. They got out of bed, dressed, and left the hotel at 6 in the morning. They had been exposed to the poison, but not enough to kill them. Unfortunately, the girls had no plans for the morning. No excursions, no trips, no sightseeing. And the longer they lay in bed, the more their bodies absorbed the poison. They could not cope, and this killed them. Despite the coroner's findings, no one was held responsible for the tourists' deaths. Officially, Noémie and Audrey Bélanger died as the result of an accident. The Bélanger family never received an answer to their question of how hotels get away with treating guests this way, and how many other unexplained deaths have been swept under the rug. Linda laments, "For the rest of my life I will carry this pain, this sadness." Unfortunately, in countries dependent on tourist revenue, the main priority is protecting profits, not people. Linda and Carl feared their daughters might fall victim to criminals, rare infections, natural disasters, or wild animals, but they never imagined the beds they slept on would be the killers. The greatest danger often lurks in the most innocent places. Next time you check into a hotel promising a wonderful stay, ask yourself, what really lies beneath that pristine white bed linen?
On a warm late April evening, a 50-year-old woman, let's call her Maria, went out on an errand, not realizing how that night would end for her. Aware that it was already quite late, Maria stayed alert. Her watchful eye did not miss a young man in a bright jacket with red and white stripes, who had clearly noticed her and began following her from the opposite side of the street. Maria hurriedly dialed the emergency services number. She asked the operator for help, explaining that she was being followed by a stranger. While staying on the line with the operator, the woman crossed the street and picked up a stone from the ground. Clearly not a timid person, Maria confronted the young man directly, demanding to know what he wanted and why he was following her. Moments later, the operator heard a sharp exclamation, a woman's scream, and then the sounds of a struggle. The operator did not yet know it, but at that very moment, the man dragged Maria onto a vacant lot. The dispatcher tried to encourage her, saying that help was already on the way. But sounds coming through the receiver left no doubt about what was happening. The man was committing violent acts against Maria. The operator then dispatched every available unit to help the woman. Not only patrol officers, but also canine units with dogs and even a helicopter. All of them rushed to the specified area, trying to locate the victim and her attacker. Meanwhile, Maria, still clutching the stone in her hand, twisted free and struck her assailant on the head and face. His blood splattered onto her jacket. The sound of sirens was rapidly approaching. The attacker's head was bleeding, and he realized he needed to flee if he did not want to end up in prison. On Monday, April 16, 2012, 9-year-old Christopher Martinez entered the school building in Las Vegas, Nevada, where he was a student. Christopher's face was wet with tears, and his teacher asked him what had happened. The boy shocked her by saying that his mother and sister were dead and that his father was wandering around the house covered in blood. Christopher added that his 4-year-old brother, Alejandro, had been left at home with their father. The teacher reported the boy's statement to the school officer, who then called the police. When the first officers arrived, they took Christopher back home. On the way, the boy explained that his family consisted of his father, Arturo Martinez, his mother, Yadi, his 10-year-old sister Carla, himself, and his youngest brother, 4-year-old Alejandro. Upon arriving, the officers cautiously looked into the house through a window and saw that the walls, floors, and furniture were splattered with blood. Amid this horrific scene, a child about 4 years old was wandering around. The police tried to coax the child outside, but at that very moment, the front door flew open and a man appeared in the doorway. Based on Christopher's description, the officers were facing 39-year-old Arturo Martinez, the father of the family. He was covered in blood, mostly dried. He looked confused, as if he did not understand where he was or what was happening. However, the officers could not know whether he was pretending. They ordered him to stop and show his hands, but the man did not respond to either their commands or their questions. The officers had no idea what the man intended to do. Why was he refusing to answer? Was he afraid of incriminating himself and decided to remain silent? After all, if the boy was not mistaken, his mother and sister were dead, while the father was alive, covered in dried blood and behaving irrationally. The police had no choice but to treat Arturo as a suspect. He was not taken to the station immediately only because he had injuries. Accompanied by an officer, he was transported to the nearest hospital. The police placed little Alejandro in the car with his older brother. There, the children were safe while detectives entered and searched the house. At that point, the police knew what they were dealing with only from the words of a child. There were no signs of forced entry on the door, but beyond the door, a true nightmare awaited them. Blood was everywhere. There was an enormous amount of it, and the attack had not been confined to a single room. Arturo's wife and the children's mother, 38-year-old Ignacia Yadira Martinez, known simply as Yadi, was lying on the floor near the bedroom door. Yadi was partially unclothed. She was wearing nothing below the waist. Investigators believed that Yadi had been sexually assaulted. She had been killed by multiple blows to the head with a blunt object. Because Yadi was found near the doorway and blood spatter was present on the headboard of the bed, detectives concluded that the attack began while she was lying in bed. After the first blow, blood pooled around her head, and after the second, it sprayed outward, reaching the headboard. This indicated that the victim had been struck at least twice before being dragged off the bed. This conclusion was supported by drag marks and finger impressions found on Yadi's ankles. The perpetrator clearly did not seem particularly concerned about being arrested. He left behind numerous fingerprints, including even a palm print on the floor between the victim's legs. In one of the children's bedrooms at the other end of the house lay the body of Yadi and Arturo's daughter, 10-year-old Carla Martinez. Apparently, the girl had suffered the same fate as her mother. The bodies of both victims were transported for autopsy. It appeared that this was not a robbery, as all valuables were still in place. On the contrary, officers found something in Arturo's pickup truck that should not have been there. The vehicle was parked in the driveway, and in the open truck bed, officers discovered a lightweight jacket with white and red stripes. It was relatively clean, with no traces of dirt or dust, indicating that it had been placed there quite recently. Detectives showed the jacket to Christopher and asked whether he knew who it belonged to. The boy answered that he did not. However, there was blood on the jacket, and it was logged into evidence. The officers then began gathering information. They started with the neighbors who had gathered outside, confused about what could have happened during the night and why half the neighborhood had been cordoned off with yellow tape. Since the police were treating Arturo as a suspect, they questioned neighbors and family friends about the relationship between the spouses. Everyone, however, unanimously stated that Arturo and Yadi got along very well. They worked hard, attended church, and raised their children. Yadi had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She earned her degree, but around the same time she met Arturo, and the two moved together to Nevada. Overall, it was a fairly ordinary story. The couple came from Mexico to the United States in search of better opportunities. And because they were willing to work hard for that future, everything seemed to be going well for them. Arturo worked in construction, became an electrician, and had a good job with a stable income. Yadi also worked hard while raising the children. The couple bought a house. Together, they opened a boxing gym, something Arturo had long dreamed of. They instilled a strong work ethic in their children as well. Their 10-year-old daughter, Carla, or Carlita, practiced gymnastics and won competitions. Christopher did well in school and was described as a wonderful, well-mannered, and talented boy. The youngest child, Alejandro, was only 4 years old, and it was too early to speak of his abilities. In any case, according to neighbors, relatives, and friends, the family had no problems. On the other hand, who can truly know what happens behind closed doors, especially since the police found no signs of forced entry? In such cases, the perpetrator is usually someone the family knows or someone who was already inside the home. In other words, Arturo was becoming increasingly suspicious. Because Arturo stubbornly refused to answer questions, detectives began to believe that the murders of Yadi and Carla were the result of domestic violence. And if not for Christopher, who had the presence of mind to go to school and tell his teacher what had happened, it is unknown how long the truth about this horrific incident might have remained hidden. Christopher told investigators that the Saturday to Sunday evening had gone exactly as usual. The whole family went out to watch a boxing match. Since Arturo had drunk a little beer, Yadi took the wheel on the way back. The family returned home quite late. Everyone went to their rooms, Carla went to hers, and Christopher went into the room he shared with his younger brother. Shortly afterward, their mother came in, wished the children sweet dreams, and gently kissed them on the forehead. The children fell asleep. When Christopher woke up on Sunday morning and stepped out of the room, he could not believe his eyes. His father, covered in blood, was standing over Yadi's body. Christopher froze in shock. He saw that his mother was not moving and realized that she was dead. For a moment, he wondered whether his father might have done something to her. He asked him what had happened. The man looked at his son with tear-filled eyes, but could not bring himself to say a single word. Christopher noticed blood on his father's head and face and decided that he was injured. He thought he should find his older sister, likely hoping she would know what to do. The boy ran to her room, but found Carla lying on the floor in a pool of her own blood. Horrified, Christopher left the room and tried to find a phone to call 911, but he could not find one. He returned to his own room, to his younger brother. He lay down on the bed and burst into tears. He was in shock, but he knew he had to take care of Alejandro. After some time, his father entered their room. Christopher washed the blood from his father's hands. For most of Sunday, the man drifted in and out of consciousness. As soon as Monday morning arrived, Christopher got himself together and hurried to school, hoping someone there would help him. Before leaving, he told Alejandro to stay inside the house and strictly forbade him from going outside. Later that same day, Monday afternoon, the detective who had accompanied Arturo to the hospital finally learned why the man had refused to speak to the police. A doctor explained that Arturo had suffered 3 horrific blows to the head, most likely from a hammer. One of the strikes was so powerful that the hammer penetrated his skull all the way to the handle. The blow landed above the brainstem. By sheer luck, his brain was not crushed. As a result, Arturo developed aphasia, a loss of speech. In other words, he was not pretending. He truly could not utter a single word. It was absolutely certain that he could not have inflicted these injuries on himself in order to deflect suspicion. Delivering such blows would have required a full swing, pulling the arm back, which would have been impossible given the angles at which the man had been struck. Moreover, a hammer would not have penetrated the skull that deeply. But how did he survive such an attack? The explanation was that a powerful blow and heavy bleeding normally cause intracranial pressure, which could have killed him. However, the attacker struck him so violently that 2 open wounds, essentially 2 holes, were left in his skull. This, in effect, relieved the intracranial pressure. Of course, the killer did not plan this. It was a miracle that Arturo survived and managed to last an entire day before being taken to the hospital. Given the large amount of blood left on the couch in the family's living room, investigators concluded that Arturo lay down on the couch when the family returned home on Saturday evening. Most likely he fell asleep, especially since he had drunk some beer. The attacker cruelly took advantage of his defenseless state and struck the man twice on the left side, followed by the most devastating blow to the center of the back of his head. There was so much blood throughout the house because Arturo did not die. Instead, he wandered around in a dazed state. Due to aphasia, he was unable to speak and, of course, could not call for help. Thus, the rapist and murderer first attacked the man, the head of the household, who could have offered serious resistance. And when he believed he had killed Arturo, he turned his attention to the woman and the girl. For some reason, the killer did not harm the boys. Perhaps he did not know of their existence, or perhaps he simply chose not to kill them. Without delay, the medical examiner performed the autopsy and confirmed what the police already knew. Yadi had been struck on the head twice. The murder weapon, most likely a hammer, had penetrated her skull deeply, passing through the bone upon impact. Carla had also been beaten with a hammer. In addition, both victims, the mother and the daughter, had been sexually assaulted. DNA from an unknown individual was found in their bodies. This meant that once a suspect emerged, their DNA could be compared with the samples collected from the crime scene. For 2 days, the police worked tirelessly searching for leads. They learned that at the boxing gym, Arturo had a trainer with whom he had parted ways amid a scandal the previous November. Arturo had been forced to call the police to remove the trainer he had just fired. In a rage, the trainer had threatened to kill Arturo and his entire family. The police could not ignore such a threat and began looking for this individual. Fortunately, the officers who had removed the trainer from the gym recalled that his name was Salvador, and his nickname sounded like El Chapo, but they could not provide any further assistance. Records of Arturo's employees contained no additional information. However, a witness revealed to the detectives that the trainer had died in Mexico shortly after the confrontation with Arturo. It had seemed like a promising lead, but unfortunately, it went nowhere. The police had no leads to continue the investigation. Therefore, they were eager to find the murder weapon. They searched for it for 3 days. Judging by the fingerprints and DNA the killer had left behind, he had not made much effort to conceal his identity. This meant he could have discarded the hammer somewhere nearby. The officers first focused on searching every room in the house. They then expanded the search to the surrounding area. One of the officers climbed onto the cinder block wall surrounding the house. At the northern gate, he noticed blood. Since the cinder blocks had hollow cavities, the officer examined the wall and discovered a blood-stained hammer inside one of the cavities. While examining the area around the house, the officers also noticed a dusty trash bin, but the dust covered it unevenly. It looked as though someone had stepped on it to climb over the wall. What was especially curious was that both the dusty trash bin and the hammer were located along the boundary between the Martinez family's property and that of their neighbors, with whom, by an interesting coincidence, they had long-standing conflicts. The police decided to investigate whether the neighbors could have been involved in the murders. Obviously, as often happens, the conflict had started over a minor issue, but it escalated on the night from Saturday to Sunday, practically at the time of the killings. Witnesses reported hearing an argument unfold right in front of the Martinez house. The story was that late on Saturday night, when the family returned home, a neighbor's car was parked in their driveway, preventing Yadi from pulling in. Yadi entered the house with the children, while Arturo went to the neighbor's door to ask them to move the car, or perhaps not ask but demand, because the details of the conversation are unclear. Later, when the neighbor finally came out to move the car, he discovered a flat tire. Naturally, all the blame fell on Arturo. The neighbors argued again, raising their voices in a dispute that other neighbors could hear. Here's the most interesting part. The argument happened at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the family was attacked at 4, just 2 hours later. Considering the timing and the bloody trail leading to the Martinez house, detectives initially suspected that a neighbor, in a fit of rage, had attacked the family. This assumption matched the evidence at the crime scene, which suggested that the killer had acted without planning, was disorganized, and had simply attacked the first victims he encountered with whatever weapon was at hand. The investigators knocked on the neighbor's door. They readily confirmed that they had a long-standing conflict with Arturo, but nothing serious enough to justify murder. The detectives did not expect them to confess so easily. They conducted a search of the neighbor's house and collected their fingerprints and DNA. These needed to be compared with the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene. The problem was that comparing DNA samples is a relatively lengthy process. To avoid losing time, the investigators examined other possible leads and discovered that on the same Saturday to Sunday night, just before the unknown intruder broke into the Martinez family home, another daring sexual assault had occurred less than a kilometer away. The police took interest in this because even in such a large city, the coincidence seemed too striking to ignore. Late at night on a deserted street less than a kilometer from the Martinez family home, a 50-year-old woman was walking. Her real name has not been disclosed, so we will call her Maria. She was heading in the direction of the Martinez residence. Since she was passing by a vacant lot in the middle of the night, Maria moved cautiously and occasionally looked around. She noticed a man on the opposite side of the street who began following her. Maria called emergency services and asked for help. The operator dispatched a patrol car, but unfortunately, the officers did not arrive in time. The man dragged Maria into the vacant lot and began undressing her. Since the dispatcher remained on the line, she heard the brutal attack unfolding and immediately called in helicopters, K-9 units, and all available patrol officers. The sound of sirens startled the assailant, preventing him from completing the attack and leaving his DNA behind. Fortunately, Maria managed to pick up a stone, twist free, and strike the perpetrator on the head with full force. Blood sprayed into her jacket. The attacker was wounded, heard the approaching patrol sirens, and realized he needed to flee. He grabbed the victim's phone and ran, heading toward Arturo and Yadi's house. He was fleeing the police and helicopters and needed to hide somewhere. Investigators quickly reviewed surveillance footage capturing the unknown suspect. He was wearing a light, bright jacket with red and white stripes, the same jacket found in the open bed of Arturo's pickup. This was a major lead. The suspect was also wearing a baseball cap, which likely fell off when Maria struck him with the stone. Investigators concluded that the attack on Maria, less than a kilometer from the Martinez home, was only the beginning. Incensed but unable to finish what he had started, the perpetrator did not simply wait in some yard for the police to leave. He entered the first house he could find, attempted to kill Arturo, attacked the mother and daughter, and ultimately killed them. Forensic specialists quickly collected a DNA sample from Maria's jacket to identify her assailant. It should not be forgotten that the suspect, for some reason, took the victim's phone and, even more surprisingly, used it. After Maria had contacted emergency services, 3 more calls were made from her phone. Of course, they were not made by her. The perpetrator in particular contacted a man named Gary Harris. Gary works at a local casino. He recalled that on that night, he had indeed received a call from a childhood friend known by the nickname Junior, but whose real name is Brian Clay. He was 22 years old. Brian did not have a long criminal record, but one incident in his past revealed something about his character. His girlfriend had become pregnant and was expecting his child. When he found out, Brian pushed her to the floor and kicked her in the stomach, attempting to provoke a miscarriage. While assaulting her, he shouted at her to make it clear that he did not want the child. This incident made Brian the prime suspect in the murder of Yadi and Carla. The problem was locating him. On the 27th, however, his mother, fearing that her son might be involved in the crime, called the police and reported that he was hiding at her home. Thus, 11 days after the start of the investigation, detectives arrested Brian at his mother's house. During interrogation, Brian attempted to rely on a lapse in memory. He claimed that he had been drinking and possibly using illegal substances that night, and therefore remembered nothing. But this was, of course, a lie. At the very least, when he attacked Maria and heard the police sirens, he realized he needed to flee. After the murders of Carla and Yadi and the attack on Arturo, he had the presence of mind to climb the cinder block wall and hide the hammer inside one of the blocks. In other words, he was not so intoxicated that he forgot to hide the murder weapon. Detectives showed the young man photographs and reminded him of what he had done to Yadi and Carla, but not a trace of remorse crossed Brian's face. He admitted to nothing. Fortunately, the results of the DNA comparisons arrived in time. The DNA from both crime scenes matched Brian. He was arrested and, in addition, charged with multiple acts of violence, assault, and 2 murders. He remained in custody, but did not face trial for several years, as his attorneys delayed proceedings by filing various motions and petitions. All of these requests were denied. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and Brian Clay was ultimately found guilty. However, the jury did not have the heart to impose the death penalty. On December 5, 2017, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Not all family members agreed with this decision. They could not understand what else Brian Clay would have had to do to receive a death sentence. In any case, executions had not been carried out in Nevada since 2006. so the practical outcome would have been the same. Brian Clay will spend the rest of his life in prison. As for Arturo Martinez, he managed to recover from the horrific attack. He returned to work as an electrician and began a new chapter in life by remarrying. His heart still carries the pain of loss, but as a devout Catholic, he found the strength to forgive Brian. Christopher, though burdened by heavy memories, decided to move forward. In May 2022, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy to protect others and help prevent tragedies from happening again. The memory of his mother and sister lives on in his heart, and their love and support have become his guiding compass in life.
A French serial killer became one of the country's most dangerous, most wanted criminals in just 40 hours. But unlike a psychopath who chooses victims at random, he carefully stalked them, following a plan he had been nurturing for many years. He was driven by a desire to take revenge on those he considered responsible for his professional failures, and especially for his ruined life. This is the unusual case of Gabriel Fortin, the HR department killer. It all began on January 26, 2021, in Wolfgantzen, in the Alsace region, in the parking lot of Knauf, a company specializing in top-of-the-line thermal insulation. It was 6 p.m., the end of the workday. Employees, slowly leaving the building to head home, noticed that their colleague, Estelle Luce, was sitting in her car with the headlights on and the engine running, not moving. When they came closer, they saw that Estelle was unconscious and her face was covered in blood. Her co-workers hurried to call an ambulance. The first rescue workers arrived very quickly, but they could no longer help her. 4 bullets fired into her head left her no chance. Worst of all, she had just messaged her children to say she was on her way home. The police who arrived found 9mm shell casings. The parking lot was unguarded. There were no security cameras and no one had heard the shots. But at exactly 5:47 p.m., one employee had noticed a car, an Asian make, either red or orange. What had happened seemed unbelievable for Wolfgantzen, practically a village of 1,000 people, where crime was virtually non-existent. All the more so because the victim was the HR director of a major company. 39-year-old Estelle devoted all her time to work and to her family, her beloved husband and children. And no one could believe something like this could happen to her. And no one could have imagined that while the police were only just heading to the crime scene, the killer was already speeding toward the home of the next victim. Imagine that the next delivery driver who pulls up to your house instead of handing over the food you ordered, opens fire on you. An experience, an experiment really, that I think many of us would happily live without. Yet on January 26, 2021, Bertrand Michel experienced exactly that. That evening, the man was just finishing work. Because of the raging coronavirus pandemic, he was working remotely from his home. The doorbell rang. Bertrand got up and went to open the door. Standing outside was a man wearing glasses, a cap, and a mask. He was holding a pizza box in his hands. Bertrand had not ordered any pizza, so he assumed the courier wanted to ask something about his neighbors. But the man asked whether his name was Bertrand Michel. Bertrand did not even have time to answer in the affirmative before a sound rang out, similar to a firecracker exploding. Despite the mask, Bertrand saw the man's facial expression change to one of surprise. The courier abruptly turned around and ran. Bertrand rushed after him, barefoot in his socks. He caught up with the courier and grabbed him, but the man managed to break free, jump into a car, lock himself inside, and speed away. Bertrand banged on the window and tried to make out the license plate number, but since he had been wounded, blood was blurring his vision, and he had to abandon the attempt. He only noted that it was a small red car of Japanese or Korean manufacture. Bertrand picked up the glasses, cap, surgical mask, and the pizza box the courier had dropped. When he approached the door of his house, he noticed a large hole. Only then did he realize that the sound he had heard had not been a firecracker. The supposed courier had been a killer, and if it hadn't been for the pizza box under which the murderer had hidden the gun, Bertrand would have been dead. He called the police. The officers assumed that the criminal's gun had jammed because he had not simply hidden it under the box, but had glued it to it. During their conversation with Bertrand, The gendarmes noted with surprise that this was the second such attack that evening, something that had practically never happened in Alsace, and that the first victim had died. Bertrand realized with bitterness that they were talking about Estelle. Bertrand and Estelle had met 15 years earlier when Bertrand was the HR director at a subsidiary of Emerson Group near Chartres. Estelle had been Bertrand's intern. She had learned everything from him. He remembered her as a very intelligent and hard-working employee. The attack on Bertrand and the murder of his former intern, which took place 50 kilometers apart, could not have been a mere coincidence. The detectives decided to examine the list of all employees who might have been dismissed as a result of the work of Bertrand and Estelle. There turned out to be more than 300 such people. Fortunately, the list was significantly narrowed down to a small number of individuals, among whom Bertrand recognized his attacker, 48-year-old Gabriel Fortin. Who was this man, and why did he attack 2 people in the course of a single evening? Gabriel Fortin essentially did not know his father, a native of Gabon who had come to Marseille in search of a better life. In France, the man met Francine Fortin, and the couple had 2 children. After the birth of the younger one, Gabriel, the man returned to Gabon, where he apparently had another family. Francine raised her sons alone and kept a very close eye on their studies, allowing no leniency whatsoever. While checking young Gabriel's homework, she could insult the child, or even resort to physical violence. For example, if he made a mistake while reading, his mother would slap him. When the grown young man finally obtained an engineering degree, he was convinced that he would now secure the place in society that he deserved. He placed great hopes on his new job, yet he himself did not strive to become a good employee. His direct supervisor, to his credit, tried in every possible way to help him, attempted to integrate the newcomer into the team, and eventually warned him that things could not go on like this. But Gabriel was consistently incompetent and caused the team to waste time. In 2006, he was dismissed. This happened 20 years ago, but it was the most difficult conversation Bertrand Michel had had to conduct in all 37 years of his career. When Gabriel entered the office, Bertrand asked whether he would mind if his intern, Estelle Luce, were present during the conversation. The discussion lasted 2.5 hours, and during that entire time, Estelle did not utter a single word. She only observed. Nothing like this had happened to Bertrand either before or after. The employee was completely detached from reality. In all project failures, someone else was always to blame, but never him. He refused to accept the dismissal and perceived what was happening as a terrible injustice. He hired 2 lawyers to challenge the employer's decision in court, but he did not see the case through to the end. Perhaps it was because he had found a new job. He was hired by Effon Environnement, a French company specializing in the manufacture of equipment for the collection, transportation, and processing of waste. Gabriel Fortin once again allowed himself to dream of the rapid climb up the career ladder he so desperately desired. But his happiness was short-lived. His skills were once again called into question. His manager concluded that he did not match what was written in his resume and could not understand why the engineer had been hired at all. After only a few months, the man was dismissed. The HR director, Geraldine Cacklin, held a meeting with him, but as in the previous case, the man refused to accept his dismissal. Geraldine was forced to literally escort him out of the building and walk him to the parking lot, explaining that he was no longer an employee of the company. Having endured a humiliating dismissal and once again lost his source of income, the man registered with the employment center in order to receive benefits. And this is very important because 2 days after the murder of Estelle and the attack on Bertrand, Gabriel Fortin visited the employment center in Valence where he had previously been registered. While the police were actively searching for the shooter in the Alsace region, on January 28th, 500 kilometers away from them, a gunshot rang out in an employment agency in Valence. At 8:45 a.m., a man wearing a jacket, a cap, glasses, and a surgical mask entered the employment center and approached the registration desk, holding out an identity card in the name of Arzavi Rashida. The man's other hand was almost completely concealed by a bag that he was pressing tightly against himself. No more than 5 minutes after entering the building, he stood up and headed straight for the office where Patricia Pesquion, the director of benefits and compensation, was located. Patricia had just celebrated her 54th birthday. She was a happy, loving wife and the mother of 2 teenage daughters. As with Estelle, she had no chance. Gabriel Fortin, who was in fact the person hiding behind the fake identity, killed Patricia with a single shot. Panic immediately broke out in the building. Some people hid. Others tried to chase the shooter, but the killer escaped too quickly. Fortunately, one employee noticed the license plate number of the car speeding away. The police were convinced that they were dealing with a serial killer. But when would this horror end? Apparently, not right away. For the shooter was on the move again. He was speeding toward his former company, Fawn Environment, in the Ardèche department. Still holding the bag pressed tightly against himself, he entered the building, introduced himself as Arzavi Rashid, and asked for an opportunity to meet with his former manager. Fortunately for the manager, he no longer worked there. Gabriel then moved on to Plan B, namely, the woman who had been involved in his dismissal, Geraldine Cacklin, who had been forced to escort him to the parking lot when he refused to accept being fired. He said that he would like to see her. However, the employee at the reception desk found the man suspicious and decided to warn the woman by going to her office. Gabriel, too, evidently sensed that something was wrong and, without waiting for permission to go upstairs, headed toward Geraldine's office. The killer spotted his victim from a distance and opened fire. Screams and chaos followed. Geraldine and one of her colleagues tried to take cover and lock themselves inside the office, behind a glass door. Of course, a single shot was enough to shatter what remained of the door. Both women begged him not to shoot, but Gabriel seemed not to hear them. He quickly fired several bullets into Geraldine and struck her on the chin, apparently also intending to disfigure her. After that, he fled. Geraldine, the HR director, died in hospital at the age of 51, leaving 2 children without their mother. The detectives knew the color and the license plate number of the suspect's car. It was located on a bridge in Valence. One of the police vehicles ended up directly in front of him, and the officers decided to ram Gabriel's red car. The collision was fairly strong, but no one was injured. The officers took advantage of the moment to pull the suspect out of the vehicle and arrest him calmly. A quick search revealed a large number of 9mm cartridges on the passenger seat. On the floor lay a Glock, which had clearly slid there from the front passenger seat, where Gabriel had thrown it after killing Geraldine. The arrested man gave his name and date of birth, and then did not say another word. He chose not to cooperate with the investigation in any way. Investigators found it difficult to understand the silent killer, despite numerous interrogations. How could someone turn into a serial killer in just a few hours? What could have gone through his mind to create such a bloody scenario? Gabriel did not want to explain his motives, and the investigators were forced to dig into his past and gather numerous witness statements in order to understand the man behind it all. The officers carried out searches of his homes in Nancy and Valence, seizing his diaries and all electronic devices. This allowed them to understand what had been happening in the man's life and in his mind after his second dismissal. Gabriel was unemployed. The benefits helped him get by for a while, but since he was not looking for a new job, he eventually had to move back in with his mother. Gradually, he withdrew into himself and distanced himself from his friends. Employment no longer interested him. Instead, he began to harass HR employees by creating fake accounts. In particular, the police discovered fake profiles that he had run in the names of Bertrand and Estelle. It was precisely them whom he blamed for his dismissal. He believed they were devoid of humanity and fired people without caring about the consequences. His constant occupation became smearing their names. It went so far that in 2017, Estelle was forced to completely leave social media. Gabriel believed that he had become the victim of a vast conspiracy, that he was being wiretapped, and that these records would permanently prevent him from finding a job. And the cherry on top, people were breaking into his home while he was away, collecting confidential information about him. The free time he now had in abundance was not spent on video games or anything of the sort. No, his hobby was shooting. Since 2014, he had been a regular at a shooting range, a fixture at a shooting club. It is possible that as early as 2014 he was already developing his plan for revenge against the HR department. because once he had learned how to handle firearms, he began stalking his victims. He physically followed each intended victim, recording their working hours, the places they visited, where their children studied, and so on. The only exception was Patricia Pasquian, who had never handled his case and did not know him personally. However, the police concluded that the target of the attack was the employment center itself, where the woman worked, not Patricia personally. From the very beginning, investigators also wondered why there was an entire day between the first series of attacks and the second. What had Gabriel been doing during that time? They are almost certain that the number of victims could have been much higher. Among the attacks he had planned was the murder of his former girlfriend, with whom he had briefly dated a very long time ago. A surveillance camera captured Gabriel at a gas station 10 kilometers from her home. The woman owes her survival solely to the fact that she had moved 6 months earlier. Gabriel also wanted to take revenge on 2 lawyers who had refused to take on his wrongful dismissal case. Finally, he had his sights set on the public prosecutor in Valence, who had not bothered to respond to his letters. Judging by what Gabriel wrote in his diary, that to reach the public prosecutor's office one had to pass through the corridor of the remand prison and go up 2 floors. If the police car had not rammed him on the bridge, the prosecutor would have been his next victim. By stopping the red car in this way, the gendarmes put an end to the killing spree. Detectives also concluded that, having taken revenge on his offenders, Gabriel intended to die, as he had left farewell notes to his older brother and his mother. After his arrest, the man gave only his name and date of birth, after which he quite literally fell silent and did not utter a single word, neither during interrogations at the police station, nor to his lawyer, nor in court. His older brother claimed that, like their mother, Gabriel suffered from paranoia and schizophrenia. He saw no point in speaking to people who, from his point of view, were part of a conspiracy against him. Nevertheless, despite medical conclusions that the man was not in his right mind at the time of the murders, the sentence was not reduced. Gabriel Fortin was sentenced to life imprisonment and must spend a minimum of 22 years in prison before he can apply for parole. He filed an appeal the same day, but unsuccessfully. The verdict remained in force. In the Alps, in the center of Upper Bugey, a narrow strip of land stretches between the mountains. It connects France with Switzerland, and at its very heart lies a lake, a small lake, but unlike others, it is of a crystal clear, sparkling blue color. This is Lake Nantua. In his travel notes of 1835, Alexandre Dumas wrote that this lake was a precious pearl. Many years later, a highway was built nearby, and the lake became a favorite destination for pilgrims and tourists alike, both from France and from neighboring countries. This story began before Christmas 2008 on the shore of Lake Nantua, in the village of Montréal-la-Cluse. Only 3,500 people live there. It is a rather quiet, peaceful place. Among its cozy low buildings and winding streets hides a tiny post office that serves no more than 15 customers a day. The clerk who runs it is named Catherine Burgod. She has worked here for 16 years and has developed her own little ritual. Her friends come to drink coffee in the tiny kitchen behind the main post office room. The first arrivals take one of the rickety chairs. The last sit on the windowsill. They drink coffee, laugh, and chat about life and men. Catherine gladly joins the conversation, despite the fact that after 20 years of marriage, she is in the process of a divorce. At times, she utters frightening phrases such as, "I've ruined everything. It would be better for me to end it all in one stroke." She made her first attempt to end her life in November 2007, and the second in the summer of 2008, when she was already pregnant. She was expecting a child by her boyfriend, a shy village boy she had met in a nightclub. And when on December 19, 2008, at exactly 9:05 a.m., a carpenter who had come to collect a parcel discovered Catherine's body in a pool of blood, the first thing people thought was, she has finally succeeded in doing what she intended. A police car parked across from the post office at 9:38. The gendarmes were also told there was nothing to investigate. The case seemed clear. Then the village doctor entered the post office and immediately understood that Catherine had been murdered. She had been stabbed multiple times. Her child, whom she carried under her heart, died with her. Suddenly, fear settled over the town. Shops and administrative offices closed. A kind of improvised curfew. Someone placed a white rose in front of the post office. The victim was Catherine Burgaud. She was 41 years old. Catherine was born and spent her entire life in Montréal-Lacluse. Her father, Raymond, worked at the town hall and had recently retired. Therefore, everyone knew both the family and Catherine very well. Her father zealously protected and cared for his daughter because he had lost his wife, Catherine's mother, and the two of them were left alone. The tragedy brought them closer together, and father and daughter cared deeply for one another. For this reason, Raymond was simply devastated by his daughter's murder. It was an unimaginable grief and shock for him. Catherine had two children, 8-year-old schoolgirl Justine and 19-year-old student Cédric, who studies in Lyon. Catherine had separated from her husband, but they had not officially finalized the divorce. At the time of her death, Catherine was expecting a child by her boyfriend. But this happiness never came for the couple. For the children, it was an equally profound tragedy. Only a few days remained until the new year, and this joyful family occasion was overshadowed by a terrible loss. Everyone was devastated. A few days later, the pathologist performed an autopsy on Catherine's body. He discovered 28 wounds on her body, including defensive wounds, which indicated that she had tried to defend herself when she was attacked. Investigators assessed the crime scene where they were to work. The post office was cozily situated on a small uphill street. Almost nothing indicated its presence. The door opened directly onto the street. There was a yellow mailbox on the facade, and that was practically the only sign that a post office stood before you. Recently, a service point of the French National Railway Company had also been located there, meaning that train tickets could be purchased on site. The post office had no cameras, nothing that could reveal what had happened, who had entered or who had left. The branch consisted of 2 rooms, the main area and a small break room with a safe, a sink, and a little table where Catherine could have a cup of coffee. It was in this back room that the body was discovered. Catherine was likely caught off guard by the attacker, who struck her with the first knife blow. She rushed toward the exit, but the killer followed her and continued stabbing. She collapsed to the floor and a pool of blood spread around her. The murder weapon and the victim's phone were missing. Yet the phone had definitely been with Catherine, because that morning she had sent a message to a friend. The perpetrator took all the money, from the post office register, the SNCF register, and even from the safe. In total, he made off with between 1,500 euros and 3,000 euros. The police were unable to determine the exact amount. The police's first assumption was robbery. Catherine was a strong-willed person, and she would not have handed over the money to a robber without a fight. Therefore, he might have lost control and killed her over a couple of thousand euros. The second assumption was that this was a premeditated murder of Catherine, staged to look like a robbery. In that case, the victim would have known the killer. It was easier to verify the second version, and that is where the police began their work. From Catherine's schedule on the morning of the murder, it is known that she left home at around 7 a.m. with her daughter Justine, whom she was driving to school. On the way, they stopped to buy chocolate rolls. This, too, was one of their habits, stopping at the bakery. She then stopped by one of her friends to pick up a pair of hemmed jeans. Mother and daughter arrived at the post office, where Catherine switched off the alarm at 8:24. She sent an SMS to a friend and began preparing to process orders in the post office, and then at the SNCF service point. Catherine and Justine settled in the kitchen, where the girl ate her chocolate roll, then kissed her mother and left for school at 8:40. The body was found at 9:05. This left a 30-minute window during which an unknown assailant attacked the postal clerk. Since no one saw or heard anything, no car speeding away with squealing tires, no one running, it appeared that the perpetrator may have been in the immediate vicinity of the post office. The unknown person who arrived right after the post office opened seemed to know her work schedule. But did he also know his victim? Investigators learned that Catherine was in the midst of an unpleasant divorce from her husband. Being a jealous man, he took the separation badly. He openly admitted that his wife had felt lonely because he worked a great deal. He also confessed to extramarital affairs during their marriage. Then one day, when he came home, Catherine simply told him in 2 sentences that she no longer loved him and wanted to separate. She had made up her mind, and he could not influence her decision. He wrote and called her many times, trying to reconcile, but it did not help. In the end, he decided to leave his wife alone. He found a new girlfriend. But here is what is curious. That girlfriend left him as well. On the very evening before Catherine's murder, at the girlfriend's workplace party, they discussed their relationship for the last time, and the lover did not change her mind. After the party, she went home, and he went to his own place. Before that, however, he stopped at a pizzeria and called a colleague at the office to say that the weekly briefing scheduled for 8:30 a.m. the next day, the day of the murder, would not take place. He explained this by problems with his mother. He had never canceled briefings before. In other words, he canceled the office meeting at exactly the time of the murder. The man told police that he had not left his apartment that morning. A neighbor saw his car in the parking lot at 8:25. He logged into his home computer at 9:09. This left a 45-minute window that precisely coincided with the time of the crime. To the police, the ex-husband appeared to be a promising suspect. A man who had just been left by his lover, who learned that his wife was expecting a child by another man, might have lost control and decided to commit murder out of revenge. But here was the catch. The theory of a crime of passion collapsed with a crash over one element. Forensic experts discovered DNA at the crime scene. Male DNA was found at Catherine's workstation and on a fabric sports bag whose origin was unclear. The DNA was mixed with Catherine's blood, making it a very important discovery for the investigation. Since the police had virtually no other evidence, the investigating judge decided to collect DNA samples, even from villagers who had never been considered suspects. For example, someone could fall under suspicion simply because their phone had been switched off at the time of the attack. Not a single sample matched, including those of Catherine's ex-husband and her new partner. This promising lead led nowhere, and the investigators found themselves at a dead end. But soon, the situation changed. At the end of January, two sisters decided to visit the cemetery. Pushing open the cemetery gate, they walked among the graves of those who had found their final resting place there. Finding Catherine's grave was not difficult. The marble slab was buried beneath wreaths and flowers. Nearby, on a neighboring grave, a man sat with his back to them. He looked devastated. The women spoke to him, admitting that they too were mourning, sharing in the grief. The man straightened up. He was crying. In his hand was a can of beer, and when he began to speak, the sisters realized that this might not have been his first drink. But what struck the sisters was not that, but the fact that he began talking about Catherine's murder. The man suddenly declared, "I'm sure he killed her like this," and made a gesture as if grabbing someone from behind and pressing a knife to their throat. He continued, skillfully acting out the scene in roles, and the sisters were amazed at how realistic he made it look. Then the man described the crime scene and noted that, by his calculations, the killer must have taken about 3,000 euros. When he stepped back to the cemetery gate, the women simultaneously said, "What if he is the killer?" They contacted the police, assuming that either the man himself could be the perpetrator or that someone might have told him how the crime occurred. The investigators decided he absolutely had to be questioned. Finding him turned out to be very easy. After all, he had told the sisters that he lived near the post office and that he was an actor. The man was identified as Gérald Thomasin. He did indeed live near the post office, which meant he could have disappeared into his home within seconds after the attack on Catherine. Of course, the police had already spoken with him earlier while searching for possible witnesses. He stated that that morning he had been asleep, alone. The gendarmes noticed nothing suspicious. Gérald did not deny that he knew the victim. It was he who had left the white rose at the post office, because he and Catherine had, one might say, become friendly. When he first pushed open the door of the main post office in Montréal-Lacluse, he told the postal clerk that he wanted to move there and open an account. The clerk, Catherine Burgaud, handed him a form, and in the line marked "Profession," he wrote, "Actor." Catherine thought the new postal client was quite a fantasist, but as soon as the door closed behind him, she typed his name into a search engine and, to her astonishment, learned that Gérald Thomasin really was an actor. He had more than 20 roles to his credit, and at the age of 16, he had received a César, a kind of French equivalent of the Oscar. After that, Catherine met Gérald repeatedly when he came to collect a money transfer at the beginning of each month. They were invariably polite to one another, and once the new acquaintance even brought her a DVD of his latest film. But how did it come to pass that the holder of the prestigious César Award, an actor who had been in films since childhood, ended up living in a modest one-room apartment near the post office in a small French town? Life had not always been kind to Gérald. He never knew his father, his mother struggled with alcoholism, and he and his brother Jérôme were placed in a foster family, where for 7 years the boys were beaten and forced to do the most unpleasant and heavy chores around the house. According to Jérôme, it was slavery worse than slavery. The children became servants to their foster parents. Everything changed when a teacher told Gérald about a casting call in Paris. The boy decided he had nothing to lose and went to try his luck. Later, director Jacques Doyon recalled that what struck him most about Gérald was not that he was the most talented, but that he was the most genuine. It touched him above all. Thus, the teenager landed a role in the famous Cult 1990 French drama Le Petit Criminel, The Little Gangster, a film about a young hooligan. Incredibly, Gérald won a César Award for his very first film role. After that, he was fortunate enough to appear in other films. He acted alongside Vincent Cassel in the horror film La Haine, and his final film role was in Jacques Doyon's Premier Rendezvous in 2008. Gérald primarily worked in auteur films and was often compared to Patrick Dewey. However, immersion in the bohemian lifestyle led to his dizzying fall into a world of alcohol and illegal substances. Despite having close friends and supporters, he sank almost to rock bottom. For the police, this suggested that he might have been capable of attempting a post office robbery for a couple of €1,000. On February 6, 2009, Gérald's house was filled with gendarmerie specialists wearing white hooded suits. They closed the shutters, sprayed luminol, and found blood that had clearly been attempted to be cleaned. But Gérald explained that he had cut himself while trying to make a sandwich. Neighbors upstairs confirmed that they had taken the man to the emergency room. Overall, the suspect behaved quite openly, even naively. Without any prompting from the police, he took out a knife he always carried with him and showed it to the investigators. The knife was important to him because he had used it during the filming of the first encounter. The police were interested in the knife, but it bore no traces of Catherine's blood. Gérald's story never changed. On that fateful morning, he was at home, sleeping, and was awakened by the gendarmes. Since the events occurred early in the morning and he was alone, he had no witnesses. He did not deny the meeting with the sisters at the cemetery, but explained that he was an actor with a vivid imagination. He simply imagined how the events could have unfolded, how he saw them in his mind, or at least how he would have portrayed them in a film. The investigators had no evidence of his involvement nor any hint of a confession from the actor. Most importantly, his DNA did not match the DNA of the suspected killer. Due to the lack of evidence, Gérald was released from custody, though he remained the prime suspect. However, the case had not revealed all its secrets. In the town of Montréal-Lacluse, 6 months had passed, and the fever of the tragedy began to subside. Summer was rising over Lake Nantua, and the first vacationers from the Netherlands had settled in the campsite. At the home of Raymond, Catherine's father, visitors were becoming increasingly rare. The gendarmes no longer came around as often as before. The only one left deeply affected was Catherine's ex-husband. The poor man did not sleep, did not eat, and did not leave the house. From time to time, when he felt particularly restless, he would drive past the post office and Gérald's apartment. One July day, he saw the actor jump off his bicycle. The man followed Gérald. He lunged at him like a predatory bird attacking a small prey, shouting, "You killed my wife. You killed the mother of my children. You staged a robbery," and began beating him. He demanded that the actor confess to what had happened, but Gérald screamed that he had nothing to do with the murder or the robbery. When Catherine's ex finally let go of his victim, he demanded that Gérald leave the town, warning that next time he would kill him. Since the man faced no punishment for this brazen midday attack, Gérald took the advice to heart, packed up his modest belongings, and moved to Rochefort, where he settled in a tent. The case weighed heavily on his shoulders. Gérald was no longer being invited to act in films and sank ever deeper into despair. Periodically, he was called in for questioning. apparently in the hope that he would confess or inadvertently reveal a crucial detail to the investigators. After one such interrogation at the station on the evening of June 24, 2013, Gerald called his brother Jérôme. Gerald was practically incoherent from drinking so much. He told his brother that he intended to go to the police and claim that he had killed Catherine. He reassured his shocked brother that, in fact, he had not killed her, but by doing so he could find out what the police knew and why they would not leave him alone. He even added, "They already know perfectly well that it wasn't me." Jérôme managed to persuade his brother not to rush and to call back once he had sobered up a little. However, the brothers did not know that officers had been eavesdropping on their conversation. On June 26th, Gerald was taken into custody and formally charged. He faced life imprisonment because Catherine had worked at the post office as a civil servant, which was considered an aggravating circumstance. Gerald's friend, the well-known actress Béatrice Dalle, with whom he had worked on a film, turned to the prestigious and respected law firm of Eric Dupont-Moretti. As soon as the lawyers took the case, they managed, against all expectations, to have the transfer of the case to trial cancelled. Gerald was still charged, but the investigation effectively started over. He was assigned to 2 new investigating judges who were tasked with examining the case from a fresh perspective. After 2 years of pre-trial detention, the actor was temporarily released. One morning, he sat on the windowsill of his kitchen, counted to 100, and then jumped 2 floors down. After a stay in intensive care and a kidney removal, he was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. At that very moment, years after Catherine's murder, a new character emerged. A fairly marginal resident of Montréal-Lacluse named Anthony contacted the police. He was a short man in his 30s with a teardrop tattoo on his right cheek and a criminal record. He did not shy away from taking illegal substances, often mixing them with alcohol. Apparently, on one such day, when his mind was completely clouded, he called the police and claimed that Gerald had committed the murder while he, Anthony, was standing outside near the post office. The man was summoned to the police station but simply did not appear, and the officers did not rush to arrest him. After a few months, when Anthony was detained for some other minor offense, investigators questioned him about Catherine's murder. He insisted that he had never said such a thing. It was complete nonsense. But by then it was too late. The wheels of the police investigation were already turning with renewed momentum, and no one intended to release the suspect. Anthony was charged with complicity. 8 years after the attack on the postal clerk, 2 men, Gerald and Anthony, were to stand trial. It seemed the case was approaching its conclusion. But an incredible surprise was about to turn the entire investigation upside down. 10 years after the horrific crime, on July 5, 2016, a young man driving an ambulance was arrested near Lake Nantua. People speculated that it was for speeding, but the truth would soon come out. The arrest was connected to the crime. The arrested man was under 30, soon to be married, with an apartment already purchased and children's rooms planned. Everyone knew him because he was a talented football player. In the 10 years of investigation, his name had never appeared in any of the case files. The gendarmes might have passed him by, had it not been for one incident in 2016. He had taken a bank card belonging to a girl he met online and withdrew €600 from it. The girl reported him to the police. He was arrested, and a DNA sample was taken. Who could have imagined that a few months later, his DNA would match the sample found at the post office? The young man's name is Mamadou Diallo. When Catherine was murdered, he was 19, a local village boy who knew Montréal-Lacluse very well. By November 2017, he was practicing as a paramedic. In his football club, he was suspected of stealing other people's belongings, including money. At first, Mamadou denied everything, claiming that he had only been to the post office twice in his life, and both times with his mother. Reluctantly, he then admitted that he had been there that morning, had found Catherine's body, and had cowardly run away. But when he was confronted with the DNA match, he had to change his story again. On that day, he needed to go to the post office's SNCF office to buy a train ticket because he planned to travel to celebrate New Year's with friends and had some preparations to make in advance. Mamadou entered the post office building but was greeted by no one. He peeked into the back room, saw the open door, the blood, and the woman on the floor. He was horrified, but he approached the postal clerk to check if she was still breathing. When he realized she could not be helped, he left, but not before taking all the money from both the post office cash register and the SNCF counter. That was how he left his DNA behind. He claimed that he had been traumatized by the scene and was afraid he would be accused of the murder, so he told no one. In other words, he had the courage to steal the money, but not to call an ambulance or the police. Furthermore, the time he claimed to have entered the post office did not match the time when Catherine was believed to have already been killed. Overall, Mamadou's version sounded highly unconvincing. By the summer of 2016, there were already 3 suspects in the case, each of whom insisted on their innocence. For Gerald, the DNA match brought long-awaited relief. He called his brother and told him that the police had finally found the perpetrator. He felt happy, sensing that he was approaching the exit of this dark tunnel. However, Mamadou's lawyer insisted on a meeting of all the suspects, a sort of face-to-face confrontation. Gerald Thomasin was encouraged by the idea of this meeting. For him, it was a chance to finally lift the weight of the case from his shoulders. The meeting was scheduled for August 29, 2019. Gerald was supposed to travel from Rochefort to Lyon. He boarded a train but never appeared at the meeting. At first, everyone assumed he had simply changed his mind. In reality, he never showed up anywhere again. On August 29th at 9:30 a.m., he boarded a train from Rochefort to Nantes, where a connection had been planned. It is known for certain that he arrived in Nantes, but he never boarded the next train. Surveillance cameras captured him leaving the station, and after that, no one saw him again. His phone also last registered activity in the area near the station. Was he abducted out of fear that he would reveal the real killer, as his brother Jérôme speculated? Or did he run away, afraid of returning to prison, where he had spent 2 years due to the slow pace of the French police? Or, as his friends believe, did he get involved with a bad crowd, which ended in a fight he did not survive? Whatever the case, the Lyon meeting went on without him. Only several years later did the court decide to dismiss the case against Gerald and his alleged accomplice Anthony. Only Mamadou Diallo faced the judge. The prosecution did not immediately succeed in securing a guilty verdict. After the first trial, Mamadou was acquitted, and the prosecutor filed an appeal. On the second attempt, Mamadou was found guilty of both the robbery and the murder of Catherine. In 2023, he was sentenced to 16 years in prison, even though he had faced the possibility of life imprisonment. Raymond, Catherine's father, had struggled to attend even the first trial due to health issues, and he passed away in 2023 without seeing the man responsible for his daughter's murder punished. As for Gerald Thomasin's disappearance, it remains a mystery to this day. The little criminal, an innocent man, as he had insisted to the police from the very beginning, is still missing. Director Nicolas Klotz, who cast him in the film Outcast, called him one of the greatest in French cinema. It is a pity that, despite his talent, sincerity, and obsessive dedication to his craft, fate was not always kind to him. The police, having spent a decade pursuing an innocent man, have now begun investigating his enigmatic disappearance. Imagine a place where the truth is known to everyone, but speaking it out loud is dangerous, where a last name matters more than the law, where a young woman's life can be worth less than the reputation of a powerful family. In the Argentine province of Catamarca Province, this was not a metaphor, it was reality. In 1990, the brutal murder of 17-year-old Maria Soledad Morales shook the nation and shattered the illusion of elite impunity. People swore, never again. But in 2020, history repeated itself. Another young woman, another son of a powerful family, another attempt to hide the truth. What changed over those 30 years? And did Catamarca change at all? Today, a story about power, impunity, and the women whose deaths changed a country. Catamarca Province is a high-altitude region in the Andes, known for its volcanoes, salt flats, and extreme mountain peaks. Tragically, in this picturesque place, provincial dynasties have long ruled with an iron hand, and young women have learned through bitter experience that some men are untouchable. Everyone knew the truth, but no one dared to say it out loud. That was the case until 1990, when one incident ignited a revolution the elite could not control. In 1990, Maria Soledad Morales was 17 years old. A quiet, diligent girl from a modest family, she took her studies seriously and dreamed of something beyond her small town. Her dreams ended on September 7th, when she attended a school fundraiser for the graduating class trip. She had no idea that she was being watched with open interest. Luis Raul Tula, a young local radio employee, and Guillermo Daniel Luque, the son of an influential congressman, pulled up beside her in a car belonging to Arnoldito Saadi, cousin of the province's governor, Ramon Saadi. Somehow, they convinced Maria to get into the car, but instead of taking her home, they drove her to a place where their friends were already waiting, sons and nephews of powerful men. Among them were Miguel Ángel Ferreira, the son of Catamarca's police chief, and Pablo Jalil and Diego Jalil, nephews of the mayor. Throughout the night, they subjected her to horrific abuse. Maria was given sedatives, forcibly injected with illegal substances, burned with cigarettes, beaten, and sexually assaulted. She was likely not their first victim, but this time they went too far. When they realized she was no longer responsive, their only concern was avoiding scandal. Her lifeless body was carried to a car, driven away, and discarded like trash. 3 days later, Maria's disfigured body was found on a road 7 kilometers from the city. She was partially unclothed, her hair cut to conceal evidence, her body showing signs of having been dragged. The police arrived at their mission, as the saying goes, to serve and protect. But here, the sentence lacked its ending: protect the local elite. Officers saw the injuries, saw the brutality, yet attempted to cover up the truth. Witnesses were threatened. Fingerprints were not properly compared. The original report was altered. Authorities insisted she had died from a fall. The police chief even ordered Maria's body to be washed to destroy DNA evidence. Governor Ramon Saadi and the entire local political structure did everything possible to bury the case. The families of the suspects stood firmly behind them. Congressman Ángel Luque, Guillermo's father, even dared to say that if his son had been guilty, the body would never have been found. The message was clear: the life of a teenage girl meant less than the reputation of a political dynasty. But Catamarca underestimated its women. They refused to let Maria become just another line in a police report. Horrified by the injustice, Sister Martha Poloni organized a series of silent marches, the first of their kind in Argentina. The entire country watched as a small province rose up against men who believed themselves above the law and beyond consequences. Thanks to their persistence, the case was reopened. After years of silence and after the Saadi dynasty lost political power, the killers were brought to trial. Guillermo Daniel Luque was found guilty of rape and participation in the murder, and Luis Raul Tula was convicted as an accomplice. Although it was widely believed that 4 to 6 other men were involved, and justice was only partially served, it was something. Maria did not choose her fate, but her death broke a nation's silence. She toppled political giants and became a symbol for every girl harmed by a powerful man. 30 years later, the people of Catamarca province had not forgotten Maria. In this province, where powerful families still control politics and the economy, a new tragedy unfolded in early 2020. But could it be that, even if barely noticeable, some change had occurred? Early in the morning on March 1st, 2020, Maria Espeche opened the door to the room of her 24-year-old daughter, Brenda Micaela Gordillo. Although it was a Sunday, Brenda was expected at work at the Catamarca Municipal Office, so her mother, as usual, came to wake her. But this time, when Maria opened the door, she saw that her daughter's bed was empty. There was nothing unusual about that. Brenda was 24 and quite independent, so nothing prevented her from spending the night elsewhere, as she had done before. But when some time passed and Brenda had not appeared at home or at work, and she did not answer her phone, her family began to worry. Ivan, Brenda's 29-year-old older brother, decided to search for his sister. He knew her habits, favorite places, and many of her friends better than anyone. He went to all the places she usually visited. He even stopped by the hockey club, knowing that when she wasn't at work, she often spent time on the ice. He spoke with her friends, who told him they last saw Brenda in the evening when she had gone to a friend's birthday party. She left after midnight, and they never saw her again. Although Ivan couldn't find Brenda, he did spot her white Volkswagen in the central town square, clearly parked there since the previous night. Alarmed, the family combed the surrounding streets, questioned shopkeepers, and even asked passers-by. Maria, her mother, felt the fear every parent dreads. Something bad had happened to her daughter. The family contacted the police. The officers took the missing person report seriously, but the challenge lay in Brenda's remarkable privacy. She rarely shared with her family where she liked to go, who she met, or how she spent her evenings. Her mother and brothers knew she had friends she spent time with, and had once shown Ivan a photo of a boy she liked. That was all they knew. For the police, there was no clear starting point for the investigation. The first few hours are crucial in missing person cases, and just when the authorities should have been rushing to find her, they were already at a dead end. Night fell over the city, but Ivan couldn't sit still. He drove through the streets searching for his younger sister. Maria, too, didn't sleep that night. She listened for the slightest sound, hoping to hear her daughter's key turn in the lock. She kept checking Brenda's room, hoping she had somehow slipped back home unnoticed. But it was in vain, because someone had already provided the answers to all her questions. On March 1st, a young man, accompanied by his parents and a lawyer, walked into the Catamarca police station. His name was Naim Vera. His father, Oscar Vera, was a respected surgeon in the province, and his mother, Marcela Vera, a highly skilled kinesiologist. Both were top professionals, and the family was very influential. Oscar and Marcela had raised 4 sons, but the black sheep turned out to be 19-year-old Naim, who came to confess to committing a crime. The young man told police that he had spent Saturday night into Sunday with a female friend, with whom he had an exclusively intimate relationship. But that night, they argued, and in the heat of the quarrel, Naim's guest tripped and fell down the stairs. The fall proved fatal. Panicking instead of calling for help, the young man disposed of the body. Naim led the police to the apartment where he had spent time with the girl. The apartment belonged to his grandmother, but because it was conveniently located across from the National University of Catamarca, the family usually rented it to students. At the time, the apartment was vacant, and Naim had been using it for his own purposes. The officers were struck by the apartment's astonishing cleanliness. The air carried the scent of cleaning products, and the staircase gleamed so brightly that it was hard to imagine it could have been the site of the girl's death. But the worst was still to come. Naim was about to lead the police to the girl's body, or rather, to what remained of it. First, Naim pointed the police to a trash bin near the apartment. It was there that they discovered a charred half of the girl's body. The remains were burned beyond recognition. The second burned portion had been buried in a ravine by the Tala River on the outskirts of the city. In other words, Naim had burned the girl's body and scattered the remains in 2 separate locations. Investigators had never seen anything like this in their careers. Naim claimed that he barely knew the girl, that he didn't even know her last name or where she lived. Yet among his personal belongings, investigators found a card with the victim's social security number, which listed the name Brenda Michaela Gordillo. Naim had kept the document even after disposing of the body. A gruesome trophy or mere carelessness? The investigators were not yet ready to answer that question. Many details remained unclear, but once they learned the victim's name, the police faced another grim and incredibly difficult task: informing Brenda's family of her death. Upon hearing the news, Maria fainted. She was so shocked that she spent several days in bed, unable to eat or drink. Meanwhile, the pathologist conducted an autopsy and confirmed the investigators' suspicions. Naim had not told the whole truth, and what he had kept silent about was far worse than what he had already admitted. Brenda's death was not an accident. She had not fallen down the stairs. She died from asphyxiation, strangled with a piece of fabric forced down her throat. It was a torturous death, preceded by prolonged agony. But before she died, Brenda fought back, fiercely scratching her killer's skin. The police, in fact, noticed fresh scratches on Naim's hands when they spoke with him at the station. From that moment, the authorities began investigating just how far the young man had gone in his lies. Here's the picture the investigators pieced together from surveillance footage and witness statements. On the night of March 1st, Brenda once again congratulated her friend on her birthday, said goodbye to the other friends, and went to meet Naeem, who had invited her on a date. She left her car in the square and entered the apartment at 1:48 a.m. Inside, Naeem suddenly attacked Brenda. He was about 30 centimeters taller than the fragile young woman and far stronger. The struggle, though desperate, was brief. He immobilized Brenda and strangled her, forcing her own clothing into her mouth. Brenda died in horrific agony, suffocating at the hands of someone she had trusted. Afterward, Naeem attempted something unimaginable. He placed her body on a grill, planning to cremate it by dousing it with strong alcohol he had bought in advance. But he miscalculated. Cremation requires temperatures sometimes reaching 1,200 degrees Celsius, whereas Naeem's grill could only reach about 400 degrees. The process went horribly wrong. Smoke drew the attention of neighbors. One neighbor, looking out her window, was shocked to see Naeem cooking something on the grill in the dead of night. But Naeem saw her too, and had the presence of mind to wave politely. The woman returned to bed. Meanwhile, under the heat and fire, Brenda's body split into two parts, and Naeem moved on to Plan B. He threw half of the body into a trash container near the apartment and transported the other half to the river, borrowing his father's van to get there. After burying the second half, he returned to his car and tried to collect himself. At that moment, two police officers noticed him. Showing no sign of nervousness, he explained that he had stopped to send a message while heading home. The officers let him go, unaware that they had just encountered the killer who had buried the second half of his victim's body. He still had a few important tasks to complete. He cleaned his grandmother's apartment, took a shower, changed clothes, washed the dirty garments, and finally returned his father's van. Then he sent a message to his friend Facundo Manzur Soria. That early morning, Facundo hadn't been asleep but was spending time with friends, and Naeem went to meet him. But the last thing Facundo expected to hear from his friend was this: he had killed Brenda. Naeem recounted the murder with terrifying frankness. He had previously told Facundo that Brenda was driving him crazy and that he would definitely kill someone, either her or himself. Facundo had always thought he was joking badly. He never imagined Naeem could be serious about wanting to kill someone, yet his friend's confession was disturbingly precise and detailed. Shocked, Facundo asked Naeem to leave and immediately contacted Naeem's brother, relaying what he had just heard. The brother shared the information with their parents, and together they persuaded Naeem to go to the police and report the crime. Interestingly, although none of Naeem's acquaintances believed he was capable of murder, they openly told his girlfriend Brenda that she could find someone better. Yes, to his girlfriend. She was his girlfriend, and his friends, including Facundo, were fully aware of their relationship. The two had met at a bar on November 24, 2019, and had started dating, a relationship Naeem would later try to disown. Yet he had a very significant reason for doing so. At the time of Brenda's death, they had known each other just over 3 months. In February, she told her boyfriend that she was pregnant. For Naeem, the news struck like a thunderclap on a clear day, a revelation that threatened to shatter all his dreams for the future. Naeem Vera had been an outstanding student, preparing to enter the University of Córdoba, one of the most prestigious universities in Argentina. Although he had excellent grades, his social status alone opened doors wherever he went. His family not only fully supported his ambitions, but was also more than willing to pay for his education in Córdoba. A brilliant future awaited him. So Naeem didn't hesitate. He immediately told Brenda that he intended to study and build a career, and that at 19 he was too young to become a father. He tried to persuade her to terminate the pregnancy, but she refused. She told him she would have the child, and he would be part of their son or daughter's life whether he liked it or not. She also informed Naeem that she had already consulted a lawyer. Naeem perceived the situation as a catastrophe, an obstacle to his future plans. He belonged to the provincial elite that considers itself above the rest of society. An unwanted pregnancy, a child conceived with a girl outside his social circle, was simply an unforeseen inconvenience. Naeem placed his ambitions above everything else, including 1 or 2 human lives. He decided that his problem, Brenda and her pregnancy, needed to disappear. Naeem began planning his girlfriend's murder. Unwilling to dirty his hands, he would have preferred to hire a hitman. Ideally, the person he hired would stab Brenda in the stomach, so she would lose the baby and possibly die along with it. Naeem even managed to establish contacts in criminal circles and reached people supposedly willing to take the job. But any reasonably serious hitman turned out to be far too expensive for him. He then asked friends for help, including Facundo Manzur Soria, but no one took his words seriously for even a moment. Desperate, he decided to carry out the plan himself. He spent time thinking through the details, where, how, and when Brenda would die, and put his diabolical plan into action on the evening of February 29th. He contacted Brenda and asked her to meet under a false pretext. Perhaps he let her believe he had changed his mind about the pregnancy and was ready to take responsibility for their future child. Brenda trusted him, of course, and suspected nothing. She died in horrific agony, betrayed by the man she loved. Her killer surrendered to the police only because he was persuaded to do so, and even then he clung to a final hope that the medical examiner would fail to determine the true cause of death. If Facundo had not raised the alarm, and if Naeem's brother had chosen to cover for him, instead of going to the police, Naeem might have escaped justice. The trial began on May 5th, 2021, marking a historic event for the province. For the first time since the case of Maria Soledad Morales, the hearing was fully recorded on video at the request of the civil parties. Naeem Vera became the youngest defendant ever tried for the murder of a woman in Catamarca. He was brought in under heavy security, as the police feared vigilante justice. He apologized to the victim's family and his own, but his words lacked sincerity. Perhaps this was because, as a psychiatrist determined, he exhibits traits of a narcissistic psychopath, a combination of pathological narcissism and psychopathy characterized by a lack of empathy, emotional coldness, and cruelty. Such individuals use psychological manipulation, humiliation, and sadism to control their victims, taking pleasure in power. It is an extremely toxic personality type, driven by a need for superiority. In reality, Naeem had not been very successful in hiding his true nature. One of his former classmates, Fernanda, reported that she had been regularly harassed by him. He and his friends insulted her in front of other students and even on the street, implying promiscuity. In an attempt to escape the nightmare, Fernanda changed schools. But that was not enough. Her harassers uploaded videos of her to an adult website, forcing her to leave the province permanently. Meanwhile, the defendant's lawyer tried desperately to argue that Naeem and Brenda were not a couple. Under Argentine law, a murder carried a potential sentence of 16 years, and with exemplary behavior, he could be released much sooner. But murdering one's own girlfriend and committing femicide are two aggravating circumstances, which meant Naeem faced life imprisonment. The difference, as you can see, was enormous. On May 14th, the court announced its verdict. Naeem Vera was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder with two aggravating circumstances. He must serve a minimum of 51 years and will only be eligible for parole when he is 71 years old. But do you know what's truly tragic in this story? Beyond the death of the girl, of course. In fact, Brenda was not pregnant. During the autopsy, the medical examiner was able to confirm with certainty that the victim was not preparing to become a mother at the time of her death. Worse still, she suffered from a serious gynecological condition, and her chances of conceiving naturally were virtually zero. Brenda had simply experienced a delayed menstrual cycle, and the pregnancy test had been a false positive. Naeem killed and burned Brenda to prevent her from giving birth to a child who never existed. All they would have needed to do was visit a hospital together for him to see that she was not pregnant. Naeem murdered the girl solely to avoid taking responsibility for a potential fatherhood. He could never imagine her perspective, because he considered himself far superior to her in terms of gender and social standing. Outwardly a normal young man from a privileged family, he concealed within him a misogynistic monster, willing to kill to preserve his personal comfort. 30 years after the brutal murder of Maria Soledad Morales, a new tragedy unfolded in Catamarca, this time involving another narcissist convinced he could escape accountability. But this time, justice prevailed. Neither his friend, nor his brother, nor his parents attempted to shield him, despite everything. This means that positive changes in public consciousness have already occurred, perhaps invisible at first glance, but they exist.